Hello, nerds!
Hello!
Nerds!
Nerds for Yang. This is a powerhouse interview. Welcome, everybody, to the show, and welcome to Scott and Steve for coming back on for a part 2 of our conversations on this channel. I'm so excited to have both of you here, and belated happy Thanksgiving and happy start of the winter holidays.
Well, same to you. Glad to be with you guys. It's an honor to be with both of you.
Well, I was looking at the statistics for the Nerds for Yang channel, and I looked at I think there's been dozens and dozens of videos that we've uploaded. And the top 2, if you exclude the Andrew Yang interviews, obviously he's kind of a big deal. But if you exclude him, you guys are the top 2, and I've interviewed a lot of people, so I'm just delighted to kind of have you guys back on, because you guys are the heavyweights.
Well, you're the convener, Tom. I mean, right? If anybody's on the show, it's because there's a show, and so that's you. So now I've been looking forward to this, spending time with you, but also with Scott. Because actually, as more of the political guy on the ground here in New Hampshire, I've got some questions that I want to throw at Scott about the reaction we get on things like UBI as somebody really mainstreams it into a presidential race like this. And I'm watching it from the ground. So as we go through the conversation, I don't want to just answer questions. I want to ask a few too.
Absolutely. Well, this will be a conversation, a group free flowing conversation. To kick things off, maybe we could start with Steve. Maybe we'll start with you, and then we'll go Scott. First question is, let's just look back at this year, because can you believe it, about to end 2019. Like, what are your thoughts on how this year has gone? And then what are you currently most focused on, or that's taking most of your energy?
Well, I'd be lying if I said that when I woke up on New Year's Day 2019 that getting Andrew Yang elected president was going to become the centerpiece of my existence for the rest of the year. But I met Andrew very early in the year for a cup of coffee, was very impressed by him, but at that point did not anticipate that I would be kind of in the dead center of a presidential race this cycle. And then his campaign and people who've become friends on the campaign stayed in touch. We did some campaigning in late March, signed on in early April, and it has become increasingly all-consuming as we move into the deep fall. What's very cool is that you see the old first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. I was there for the ignore, and I was there for the laugh.
Right.
And we're seeing more and more of the fight. And I think some of that is because other candidates are finally realizing that not just Andrew, but what he stands for, what has become a movement, and this very large and passionate group of Yang Gang supporters that keeps growing and keeps getting more diverse and keeps getting more difficult to marginalize politically. Mm-hmm. It's become a threat. And I think here in New Hampshire, what we really think about here as we enter December, we've got a staff of dozens of people and growing. We've got 8 offices here on the ground. We're going to open a 9th one probably in the next week. And it's become a very professionalized campaign in terms of the efficiency of it. But I'm glad that I don't think we've lost any of the authenticity that I think is at the core of Andrew's appeal. So he says things that people haven't said before, including about freedom dividend, about the way that we use data, about not being a jerk, and that is appealing to more and more people. So I'm pretty excited about the results of it. But I also know that in New Hampshire, the next 2.5 months, 10 weeks, more will happen in the next 10 weeks than has happened in the prior 10 months in terms of what you'll see in polling and the moving of people. So that's kind of scary at times, because you realize, I got a coffee here. And we're going to be drinking a lot of it. It's going to get real intense now for 10 weeks.
Yeah. Incredible. Yeah. And Steve, how do you feel about the kind of arms race on the ground? Like, you always hear about other campaigns, like having armies of people and offices on every block. And obviously the Yang 2020 campaign has grown a lot in New Hampshire, I'm sure. How do you feel about where we stand in this critical point?
A decision was made by many campaigns in the last few months whether or not to go further in on New Hampshire and or other states or to retreat. And you find that obviously a number of campaigns have dropped out of the race altogether, including increasingly well-known people like Beto, probably most prominently recently. But you have other candidates like Senator Harris, and Julian Castro, Amy Klobuchar, who, to different extents, have been deciding to put their chips into the table in Iowa rather than in New Hampshire. Harris and Castro probably most prominently. And that means that there's more and more space that we can take up as New Hampshireites are seeing less and less of some of these other candidates. So we keep growing. I mean, I mentioned the 8 offices. We continue to look at offices because we continue to have demand. We're growing in staff. Obviously, this takes money. A lot of your viewers probably are familiar with and hopefully participated in the $2 million in the last week Yang 2020 effort. We got there at about 12:25 Eastern time. So we made it comfortably by 12 o'clock Pacific. And I mean, think of this. In the first quarter of the year, Andrew raised $1.8 million in the first quarter.
Yeah.
And he raised $2 million in a week at the end of November, which includes Thanksgiving, which is not the ideal day to be raising money.
Yeah.
So the order of magnitude, that's the fuel that allows us to do these things on the ground. And I feel like we're arming up in terms of the ability to communicate as well as pretty much anybody. And I think the numbers at the end of the fourth quarter, at the end of December, they're going to exceed quarter 3, and they're going to be right there with the top candidates that we've been talking about all year. And now finally, they're going to have to start talking about Andrew Yang too.
Let's hope so. And I know, Steve, you wanted to get some time with Scott about UBI, and I definitely want to hear about it too. Before we move on to Scott's kind of look back at the year, Scott, did you have any questions for Steve as our man on the ground in New Hampshire in the Granite State?
Just trying to think of something that that people would be interested in hearing as well. Would be like, what are some like individual stories from on the ground, like meeting people in New Hampshire, and, like talking about Yang and introducing the idea, and like some interesting stories as far as someone who, let's say, was very apprehensive or even against Yang or something at first, and then you talked about him or talked about like the policies in a certain way, and let's say some policy turned it around, and like these kind of interesting stories that are very memorable that I think it would be useful for people to hear.
It's a good question, and it kind of gets at the core of why New Hampshire can be such a good place for Andrew, because it's small enough, politically engaged enough, that you get a chance at conversations like that. So I look at it like there's 3 kinds of people that if you can get in a conversation with them about Andrew, things are going to go well, and uniquely well relative to most other Democratic candidates. So for example, the 3 categories are people who were Trump supporters in 2016, but are somewhat dissatisfied because they felt like he was promising things that he's not delivering. The line we use a lot is Donald Trump was the wrong answer to the right question. Andrew Yang is the right answer to the right question. That gets Trump voters listening. So when you're at an event and they'll come to your table, let's say a booth, you're doing door to door, and you've identified like the wife was a Democrat that you've been targeting, and that's why you're at their door, but maybe the husband answered the door. So they weren't the target of the reason you walked up to that door in the first place, but you got them, so you're going to have a conversation. And this happens. They'll say, well, I voted for Trump. Okay, how do you feel about that? 3 years in, do you want to re-up them for 4 more? Like, well, this thing isn't better. I feel the same level of stress that I did before 2016. If they worked in a manufacturing job, they don't necessarily feel like that's much better. They don't feel like their buying power is a whole lot better. The cost of medicine isn't any cheaper. The cost of housing, the cost of education. None of these things have gotten appreciably better. And they quickly realize as you let them talk about it, if you go in and you go, oh, well, Trump sucks, so you can't vote for Trump. In politics, it's very hard to convince somebody to vote for your candidate or to vote for you if you begin by implying that they're stupid. Nobody likes that. And a lot of the folks that we're talking to who voted for Trump, they're not stupid. They're not racist. They're people that identified legitimate anxiety and don't believe that the way that we've been doing it for the last several generations is likely to change the outcome, right? The definition of insanity, do you keep doing the same thing, expect a different outcome? They weren't willing to do the same thing. And whether one agrees or disagrees, they did not see Hillary Clinton as substantially different from the things that had gotten them into the rut they felt like they were in already. And Trump was, if nothing else, different. So we'll have conversations. I mean, I'll talk about my parents. How about this? My parents voted for Donald Trump in 2016. They became familiar with Andrew Yang in a substantial way earlier than I did. And this is what one of my parents said to me a couple of months ago. If Yang is the nominee versus Trump, I vote for Yang. If Biden is the nominee versus Trump, I vote for Trump. If Warren is the nominee versus Trump, I volunteer for Trump. I mean, the orders of magnitude of the passion as well as the apprehension. They want change. Just because they're not satisfied with Donald Trump doesn't mean that Trump voters have given up on the idea that change is desirable. What they want is an outsider who has their act together. And obviously, Andrew provides this stark contrast in obvious kind of competence, a different kind of charm and affability. He's different. The first major Asian American candidate, certainly his Taiwanese background. These are very different things that are obviously different. This is very attractive to Trump voters. So we let Trump voters tell us why they voted for Trump and what has not been so great about it. And then we jump in and we explain why Yang is the answer to the legitimate concerns they often have. The other kind of voters we can talk about throughout the hour is they're clearly what I would describe as 2016 Bernie voters who want progressive change. They see income inequality, wealth inequality, educational access inequality, and they recognize that a wealth tax is not going to get you where you want to go. Some of them also have concerns about whether or not Bernie or Warren can beat Trump in the general, as they appreciate the outsiderness. And then the last kind of voter that we talk to, that's the most interesting, is the non-voter. The person who's been disengaged or unengaged, really, typically younger, but not always, and they're looking for a reason to give a crap. And they're somewhat similar to the Trump voter, except that the Trump voter, instead of getting disengaged, said, I'm going to go all the way to the reality TV show host. The disengaged voter just said, you know what? It's not worth it anymore. It doesn't matter who wins. So the fact that Andrew is so different is very attractive to all three of these groups. And if you take them plus kind of mainline Democrats, progressives, moderate Republicans, a growing young cohort, including Asian Americans, it's an unusual and diverse coalition. But the conversations often end up being remarkably similar by the end of them.
I think there's something there that I think is being discounted by like the political establishment and a lot of people, is that, like you said, when it came to last election, Trump voters were really like, okay, the system is not working for us. We're voting for the guy that is like outside the system and is saying that he's going to like really change the system, drain the swamp and all that stuff. And at the same time, you had all these people, because we're voting against people, like there's so much of the vote last time was against Hillary or against Trump. It wasn't really like there's so many people that were voting against instead of for. And I think this time around, there are so many people that are disengaged and who are not part of this political process. And this is like an election where with Yang as a potential nominee, he can be that person, someone who's been sitting back going, look, this is not working for me. They can get behind and be like, yeah, I'm going to actually vote for this guy and I'm going to get active for this guy, because he isn't even just like talking about destroying, the system or whatever. And but he's talking about like, yeah, making the system work for us. He's outside the system and he will make it work for me and my family and my friends. And I think that's just like incredible potential there as far as that, massive amount of voters who have so far just been like, look, the government just sucks. Everything sucks. I'm out. I'm checked out.
Oh, and it's funny. One last thing that we realize more and more, one place where Andrew has struggled in terms of the cohorts of voters relative to others is older voters. Anybody who's looked at the polling sees that if you look at, for example, voters under the age of 40, Andrew keeps going up well into double digits in some of these polls. And of course, the challenge is you got to keep getting younger people involved in the process. But historically, younger people do not make up the majority of the voters. And it's the reason why in New Hampshire, you might be at 5% in a poll rather than at 10%, is simply because of the ratio of younger voters to older voters. So Andrew has struggled, relatively speaking, with the 65 and older cohort. But here's the thing. He's going to be in town tomorrow and Tuesday. We've got our shovels ready. It's going to be rock and roll weather, and he's going to be up here. But we're going to go to some older American cohorts, some assisted living facilities with heavy concentrations of older voters, predominantly Democrats. When we tell folks about the freedom dividend, that it stacks on top of Social Security, and it is this, I believe this quite strongly. It's one of the many reasons I support Andrew. It is the freedom dividend would have the effect of being the greatest strengthener of Social Security in the history of the program since its inception in the 30s. As we kicked out pensions and personal savings as two of the three legs of the retirement stool, we now are a retirement unicycle. It's Social Security, which was never designed to be able to keep older Americans above poverty in a unilateral fashion. Well, that's what we're asking it to do now. And so while other politicians say the right things about strengthening Social Security, if you actually look at their plans, they either do pretty much nothing, or even the boldest plans other than Andrew's will get an extra $250 to $400 a month in the hands of certain selected, and that's a big part of it. And I know, Scott, you've been such a champion on this. When we start picking winners and losers, you feed the cynicism of the system, you add a bureaucracy, you add a cost, you then get people that, some people might game the system, but you get other people that end up unwittingly being unable to access the system when we block grant things to the state level. And then the ideology of your local governor or state senate or state house can totally make a social program inaccessible to the vast majority of people for whom it was designed. And so when we talk about in these simple terms, the elegance of it, we can get older voters who right now look at, frankly, a 44-year-old Asian American guy they've never heard of, and then they see Joe Biden, and they go, well, I know who Joe Biden is.
Yeah.
Who's one of us? And so to bust through that, we're not going to do it by like making Andrew Yang look like he's 74 instead of 44. That's not the point. We got to do it by representing thoughtful change that actually is going to make a positive impact in your life and the life of the people that you love. And the freedom dividend and the stacking on top of Social Security, that is moving the needle very quickly. And I'm not surprised when we see the reaction.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Scott, what has your year been like, and what are you focusing your efforts on these days?
You know, it's been a hell of a year. Yeah, it really was interesting how basically it all fired off in February with the Joe Rogan appearance. You know, obviously I've been with in support of Yang's candidacy since we started running back in 2017, and so it's been a long process. And there's just so many times where just hoping, like, when is this going to catch? When is this going to catch? And he was just putting in so much time on the ground and building up, and I could see him improving over time as far as in his speaking engagements and his messaging. And then it was that fateful day in February on Rogan that was just lit a fire. And so ever since then, it's just been like this rocket ship up to where we are now, where, like Steve mentioned, we just raised $2 million in a week, but also it was $1 million in like less than 36 hours. And that's just, that's incredible when to think that where he was, back in January this year, but also, back in 2018, back in 2017, it's been incredible to watch and be a part of this growing Yang gang. And it's just amazing. As far as like what I've been up to, I think that the thing that's really gotten people's attention that I've been a part of is recently the MSNBC media blackout stuff, and it's like I started that thread on Twitter, and it was just something where in the subreddit it was just something, a pattern I started seeing forming as far as there's that one. It was like, I don't know, 5 times or something. And eventually I was like, I gotta like do a whole like thread for this and collect them all in one place, because this is getting ridiculous. And it's been amazing to see that just continue to grow, like over and over again, and then they'll apologize, and then they'll do it again, and then they'll apologize, and they'll do it again, just over and over again. You just see these exclusions, and sometimes they just get even just crazier. It just the kind of, you look at them and you're like, really, come on. Like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Like that didn't really happen.
Yeah, like there's been instances where I'm like, okay, that's got to be fake. Like somebody like photoshopped that.
Right.
That's not real. And sure enough, I look into it and it's legitimately real, and I'm just shocked that it's actually real. So been putting those together into a thread, and then I made an article out of all those examples, and I've decided to start like updating that like every couple of weeks or whatever, since they just keep on doing it anyways. And that got, I mean, each time after like a major event, it goes through a news cycle, and then there's like a trending keyword of some kind. I mean, get behind it, try to get attention for it. And sure enough, like the Streisand effects kicks in, which has always been my goal from the beginning. It's like, look, if they're going to exclude Yang, then yeah, you can tell that they're doing that, potentially because by excluding him, then you ignore him, you don't learn about him. So they're able to kind of, direct people to other candidates. But in doing so, if they do that like egregiously enough and often enough, then you get the backfire effect, and just it can explode in the media. And then you can get the effect of people going, who is this guy that they're working so hard to get me not to see? And then that in itself can be enough to actually win people over to really looking into him. Because, and this is directly related to Trump too. I mean, Trump has been talking about fake news, and the way that people feel about the media is really down in the dumps. Like we are absolutely there's some serious erosion of trust in our institutions, and including the media. And so that helped get Trump elected. And so that didn't go away. It's not like suddenly the media has gotten better and we trust them more as to their reporting and what they're doing. So here we are now with Yang, and we've got this candidate that seems to be heavily excluded. Then all these people that really hate the way that the media is and is trying to basically manipulate their opinion, then they're like, okay, I actually got to seriously look into this candidate. So it's been interesting to see that that's been winning people over. And yeah, that most recent one was a strong media cycle. And it's great to see too that Yang has decided to step it up a notch, as far as, instead of being like more of a nice guy, I understand, you should correct this, I should be on this, of being like, no, look, this is, on purpose. Come on, guys. Until you apologize to me personally and start giving me fair coverage and allow me the same treatment as far as people coming on to speak for me that you do other people, then I'm not going to be on your network. And so, that kind of hard stance has really gotten more attention too.
Steve, was that a hard call or hotly discussed internally? I mean, for so long, as Scott mentioned, Andrew has been taking the high road and being very gracious. And obviously at some point, he said, hey, this is really not okay. How did that, what can you share about how that went down?
I'm thinking about what to share versus what cannot be shared. But I can say this: it was not without genuine effort at the highest levels of the campaign and high levels of the network,
right,
to have the campaign reach out and in a private manner, direct, to be sure, animated, to be sure, but direct and but in a classy way, to communicate and say, look, after that last debate in particular, come on, guys, 32 minutes. Elizabeth Warren had 5 opportunities to answer a question before Andrew Yang got asked a single question. And the pattern, and Scott, one of the things that Scott has done so well, not just on empowering our supporters to understand the policy, particularly of UBI, in easily digestible ways, that's critically important. But also to catalog the way you did on Twitter, Scott, all of these examples, bang, bang, bang. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 12 times, shame on I don't know what at that point. And it was clear. And they would deny. NBC would deny that it was happening. And that was the most frustrating thing of all, because it's like, either acknowledge it happened, say it was unintentional but it's obvious, and then demonstrate that you're going to fix it in the days to follow. It's not hard to demonstrate. In your subsequent graphics, demonstrate through performance. It's not the words, it's the deeds that matter eventually. And on too many occasions, NBC would say some form of, I'm not sure if this is actually true or not, but I understand why. Sort of the old, if you're offended, I apologize. Like the non-apology apology. And that a few times, that's all right, because it could be honest a few times. But after a dozen to 15 times, you can't just keep doing that, or else not only does it not create change, it begins to undermine our campaign's own ability to fight for itself, to stand up for itself. Our own credibility could get compromised if we do not at some point question the credibility of the entity, in this case, NBC. All we want is we want to be on the graphics. We want to get time commensurate with our polling. Rather than getting 6 to 7 minutes in a debate, it should be more like 9 to 10 minutes if it's going to be commensurate to our polling. There are people that are below us in the polling that are among the top 2 or 3 time speakers, and that's not right. So we made the decision that you have to be out there publicly, and you have to express not just frustration, but what can you control to do something about it. And then we got to thank the Yang Gang, because it generated tremendous additional attention beyond that, beyond the one-day story, with everything from using Twitter effectively to kind of create additional news stories that create this virtuous cycle of news, the coverage about the coverage, then the coverage about the outrage, then the coverage about the coverage about the outrage, right? This thing can keep going. And that can't happen unless you've got a real passionate base that's willing to keep feeding that beast and not take no for an answer. It was not an easy decision, but at the end of the day, it was a clear decision once you went through the process.
Yeah, and this is also, it's an opportunity for campaigns to actually join forces. Yang is the one who's definitely disproportionately being excluded the most, but there are other exclusions that I've recorded as well. And everyone should be actually interested in this. And this is even the people who are not being excluded. They should be interested in this. Like especially Bernie is still excluded sometimes, but he certainly knows what it was like last time around.
Yep.
And this time around, he should be speaking up more about this, saying, yeah, this isn't right what they're doing. I experienced this last time, and you guys should not be doing this anymore. This is wrong. Warren supporters, should be, we understand we're getting a lot of support, and Warren should be speaking personally, saying, yeah, this needs to be like a fair thing. Come on, asking me 5 times, like within the first half hour, and not Yang, who's sitting up on the stage too. There should be an ability for more people to get together, the supporters and actual candidates, to talk about this and push for a more fair kind of platform.
The Booker supporters might be okay with the current process, but we won't.
Well, I'll tell you this.
Amy Klobuchar too.
Yeah, Klobuchar, I'll tell you this. I'm very proud of how the campaign has generally, and this comes from leadership from the top, from Andrew himself, has not been going negative on other candidates as a central operating principle of the candidacy. Andrew, more than any candidate in this race, it's one reason why I loved him early in the year when I met him, and then the more I heard him, the more I realized this is who he was. He's running for things. You alluded to this, Scott. He's running for things way more than against things. And he's definitely not running against people. If you ask him about Trump, he'll give you an answer. He obviously is no fan. But he's not running just because Trump is no good. He's got big ideas that solve fundamental problems, the right answer to the right question. And it means that we have very few enemies among the other campaigns who have grown in respect, like internally, the other state directors and field directors, field operatives on the ground at the national level. There is a camaraderie there that does not necessarily exist between other candidates in these campaigns who have defined themselves more as what they're not rather than what they are. And it also means, I think the other campaigns are realizing that the Yang Gang, that Andrew's support base, is unlike anybody else's support base. And that if Andrew is the nominee, we're going to need everybody in. And I'm confident he will be, but if he's not, these other campaigns cannot afford to alienate this incredibly diverse collection of Trump voters, progressives, non-voters, new voters. These are people that we get so many people that say it's either Yang or I don't know if I'm going to vote in November, or it's either Yang or maybe I default to Trump just because I don't trust, certain candidates or whatever. Andrew has identified not just a way to be the nominee, a base to become the nominee, but also what the future of a real governing majority in America can look like. It involves people that have been involved for generations, and it has to involve a lot of people that have never been involved before or are in danger of falling out of the system altogether because the system has failed them. Andrew's doing that in a way that I think Bernie did some really good things along these lines 4 years ago. Trump, in his own way, brought people in that were falling out of the system. But Andrew's doing it in this young, diverse, generationally kind of renewing and exceedingly positive way that has a chance to provide real long-term benefits for building coalitions that can get things done for the next 20 years. It's a big deal. That's very exciting to see happening.
Yeah, I just want to add too that there is definitely a growth in, say, recognition and power of the Yang Gang, and to the point where I think other candidates are starting to recognize just how valuable the Yang Gang is and can potentially be. So I think this is my theory. Warren previously, like earlier this year, was asked about basic income, and she basically excluded it. I would describe her view of it as like a in case of emergency, break glass kind of policy. And so it's like, oh, there's all these other things we should be doing instead. And maybe if things get bad enough, then we can go for UBI, but let's do all these other things first. And then she was asked about it more recently. And her opinion appears to have, softened as being like, this is a policy to consider, look into, instead of being like this break in case of emergency, break glass. And so my theory is that she's actually trying to appear warm enough such that she does not lose Yang Gang support, so that if she is the nominee, and she's warming up, and even to the point where if she's actually saying, "Oh yeah, let's pilot this" or something, then she's hoping that she can get some of the Yang Gang behind her to actually go into the general election with this valuable asset that the Yang Gang is fastly becoming. And so that's interesting itself. So there's Yang, who could potentially be like a VP pick or something if he doesn't win the primary. But then that the value there is with the Yang Gang. So like the stronger we are, then the more valuable we ourselves become to the rest of the candidates, and therefore they have to start catering to us and what we want. And so there's a potential there that we can still transform the policies that are proposed and what happens in the next, whoever wins. Hopefully it's Yang. But even if it's not, we still have that power to potentially change things, like you said, for decades to come. I want people to understand that they are really it's powerful central part of this campaign. It's not Yang. It's all of us, and building this wave to get him into office and start changing things to make things work for all of us.
I know, Tom, we were talking about this before the show. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave a few minutes earlier than I might otherwise, because today in the Yang campaign is the Day of Humanity, where in different parts of the country, different kinds of community service, we actually had to move ours around because of the impending snowstorm. So it's going to involve cleaning up some local parks in Manchester with volunteers, people that are Yang curious, Yang staff, and I'm a part of that, obviously. And I'm in our Manchester office, which is right down the street from where we're going to be convening. But one thing I did want to ask you, Scott, is over the course of the year, I've watched the whole UBI conversation evolve to the point where a couple of debates ago, a good 30 minutes of a presidential debate were about, directly and indirectly, about universal basic income, the strengths and weaknesses, how does it compare to a wealth tax. That is a remarkable accomplishment in and of itself. It's not the reason we're doing it. We're not here for moral victories. We're here to win. But it was an amazing feeling to be with a group of supporters at our national office 2 debates ago and to watch that happening.
Yeah.
It was an extremely fulfilling moment. And that's somebody who's relatively new, to this conversation. You are in the dead center of it and are known for it. How did it feel to you?
It almost, that moment in the debates almost felt surreal that they were actually talking about this. And then all of a sudden, you had like Tulsi said that she supported it there during the debate, and Castro was like, yeah, we should pilot this idea. And so it was just like, not only had it grown to the point where we're discussing it, but it had grown to the point where candidates needed to like go out there and say like, yeah, I support this idea too. And so it went from this, I would say, Sanders' view of this has long been that this idea is impossible. And so he might even be like, okay, like, yeah, it could work. And, I would like to see poverty reduced, but, I just don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it's realistic. So I'm going to use 0% of my political resources to try to push this idea. I'll just go out there, and you can see I have like a record timeline of Sanders' opinion on basic income too. And like over the years, he seemed to be warming up on it. At first, he was only asked about it when he was, he only talked about it when he was asked about it. And then he started bringing it up on his own. But it was always like, yeah, I agree with this, what this idea is trying to do, but I think there are other ways of doing it. And yet, so he didn't try to push this at all. And I think that if he had, then this conversation would even be more advanced than it is. It took Yang to come up and really start pushing this and building this movement for this. And now here we are, where we've got like a large enough movement built, and that people are actually interested in this, and they're sharing it with everyone else. And it's gotten to the point where candidates now they're feeling that they need to have a stance on this, that they need to look into it, and they need to potentially at least not be against it. So you've got like your Biden, who has before said that, he thinks it's like anti-work, and then it's like giving up on work, and, I don't even know if he's really looked into it that much, because he's Biden, so he could just give an answer and not care. But like, other candidates are now thinking, okay, I need to have some kind of stance on this. What should it be? And that political calculus itself means that basic income has reached the point where I've always, been pushing for it to reach that point, because it's this serious issue that, as soon as candidates feel that they're going to lose an election if they're against or for something, then that's really where it counts.
It's a buddy of mine who works in media and has run some online newspaper, newsletter kind of type businesses. He told me many years ago that the moment on a subscription website, whether it's something like Newsweek or Time or something that's like a niche kind of information site, he would ask me, what is the price point where you start to lose?
Uh-oh.
You lose you?
Oh, no. We're going to miss out on the story.
Oh, Steve.
Steve.
Come back, Steve.
I saw someone waving to him, I think with a shovel. Maybe they cut him off and they say, hey, we got to go. We got to do our Day of Humanity.
Pull the plug on Steve.
You're sitting back there chatting on YouTube.
Humanity first, Steve.
Yeah. Well, this might be Steve's way of saying that he's got to go. I know he did promise that he would leave around this time, because he has a commitment to participate in other stuff. Scott, do you have another like 10, 20 minutes? Can we keep chatting, or how are you doing on time? Yeah,
let's chat. Yeah.
All right. I'm gonna. Yep, he's gone. Okay. Wait. Oh, he's coming back.
Okay, I'm back. Okay. I'll be real quick, because then I do have to go. But I like the story. So, like, what's the price point? My friend who does these websites, what's the price point? He'd say, and I'd say, is it $1 a month, 5 a month, 10 a month? At what point do you lose subscribers? And he said, nope, it's 1 penny. The second it goes from free to not free, you lose almost everybody. But the moment somebody's willing to pay a penny for a service or a product, it suggests they see value in it, and then everything changes. I think it's the same thing with the concept of UBI. Mm-hmm. If you're Bernie, who has shown a willingness to be very provocative and forward-thinking, whether you agree or disagree with them on the issue, on a number of things that have become mainstreamed in a very short amount of time. The conversation about Medicare for all. Bernie deserves a lot of credit for moving that ball in a remarkably small amount of time. The way we look at same-sex marriage, the way we look at cannabis legalization. Yeah. It's amazing how some things can move very quickly as soon as you get people from, nope, I don't even want to talk about it, to, okay, I'm willing to talk about it. The second you move off of 0 to 1 penny, so to speak, everything goes flying. And I feel like in this election cycle already, through the freedom dividend conversation, we have crossed that Rubicon. Yeah. And it means if and when Andrew's president, it will be remarkable how many people will be willing to go there because he's put his chips on the table on it. Even if he's not president, it increases the chances he's the vice presidential selection, a cabinet secretary. This is not going away. And I think that Andrew is a unique figure to be able to help push this for a number of reasons. But we have gone from 0 to 1 penny, so to speak. And that is the hardest line to cross. Everything else, we'll look back in 10 years, 5 years, and we will be amazed at how fast things move from this point forward.
Yeah, it is so important to have someone pushing for an idea. And like you said, Bernie was pushing Medicare for all. Yang is now pushing the freedom dividend. But you have to have someone pushing it. Like, we're so used to these, say politicians in general tend to just be kind of, they'll form their focus groups and they'll ask, like, what do you support? And then, that's what they're like, oh, well, it looks like that this is the way to go. And so it was really frustrating to me to see basically Bernie did that with basic income. I feel like he focus grouped and decided that a job guarantee had more support than a basic income. And so that's where he put his chips. And Yang is showing that the same thing that Bernie showed last time around, that is, if you lead the way, then people will follow. If there's a good idea out there, you can't just expect that, the polling shows that there's no support for it. Well, it's because nobody knows about it. And as soon as you inform people about it, then an idea that was unknown can become extremely popular to the point where people demand it. And here we are. People are starting to demand this idea. And that's just incredible from my perspective to see that we've reached that point.
Well, if not for your efforts and those of others, a few others, wouldn't be at this point. So Andrew deserves a ton of credit. The campaign's done a great job with it, but it needed to get to a first place where somebody like Andrew could grab the baton and do something with it in the political context. I apologize. I unfortunately need to scoot off because I got to help kick off this day of action. But I really appreciate the chance to be on again today, and I'm glad to do it again between now and primary day. It's going to be a rock and roll 10 weeks here.
We absolutely are going to have you back, Steve, and appreciate you carving out the time that you could. And I know that you've got commitments on important other things that are going to help the campaign move forward in New Hampshire. So good luck to you, man, and give them hell.
All right, guys. Thanks very much. Same here. Give them hell.
Later, Steve.
It's great chatting with you, Steve.
Same here. Bye-bye.
Before we go off onto something else, I just want to build off of what Steve was saying there, because I think there's a really interesting historical story to add to this, because we've seen this movement happen because of Bernie with Medicare for all and Yang with the freedom dividend, and you can see that what happens when a big voice kind of gets behind something. And so we saw the same thing actually back under Nixon. And so this was a really interesting story where just months before Nixon announced his family assistance plan, so this was over the course of the 60s, a guaranteed income was being more and more discussed. And it reached the point where a couple of researchers decided to go to DC and they surveyed, I think it was 50 members of Congress, and they asked each of these members of Congress about a guaranteed income, and they were saying, okay, so what do you think about this idea? Do you think it's politically realistic? Do you think that if it was proposed, if it would pass through the House, if it was passed through the Senate, and if the president, would sign it into law? And when they asked this question, basically everyone was like, look, this is completely unrealistic. This is just not going to happen. Like, sure, economists are talking about it, but it's just not going to happen. And it's not going to make it through the House or the Senate. And even if it did, like, the president would never sign it. That's just, ridiculous. And so then just months, literally just a matter of weeks after this report was published, Nixon then proposes his guaranteed income plan called the Family Assistance Plan. So then they go back and they ask these same members of Congress, and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is realistic. It can get through the House and the Senate. Yeah, like,
this was
what
our
changed?
idea after all. Yeah, I was for this from the beginning.
Right. So what changed? Well, the president proposed it, and like that's the only thing that changed. The idea didn't change. Like, nothing else changed except for the president proposed it, and now all of a sudden it went from this impossible idea to this, sure, we can pass this. And sure enough, it went through the House twice, and it just didn't make it through the Senate. But if it had made it through the Senate, then of course Nixon would sign it because he's the one who proposed it. So we were really close, and we got close because basically just the president said, this is a good idea, let's do it. And that's really all that it takes. Is it takes someone with enough political clout to really start pushing for something, and then we can make it happen. And so, yeah, that's where we are right now, where we're seeing this idea become a much more discussed, serious idea that people are adding to their own platforms as congressmen, and also as president. We even have someone who Zoltan Eastman, joined the race on the Republican side, and he's got basic income in his platform. So, now we've got like another presidential candidate that's pushing for it, aside from, Marianne Williamson, who's added UBI to her platform, and Tulsi Gabbard is supposedly, I don't think she's added it technically to her platform yet, but she says that she likes it and, wants to do it. And so, yeah, like, it's just incredible to see more and more people coming out for this. And the bigger the names that come out for it too, then you'll see more and more of a movement around this. So, like, as soon as, like, if Elizabeth Warren said, yeah, actually, I'm adding this, I'd say that we should pilot it, or actually let's do it like in a state or something, like her kind of foot in the pool kind of situation. Or if like Biden decides to switch and he's like, well, after I thought about it some more, and actually it would be really pro work because it recognizes all the work done in the homes and stuff that people are doing for free that we don't recognize right now. You start speaking more like Yang. As we see more people do that, then it's just going to really just blow this idea wide open and really advance it forward. And also, I think it'll help Yang, because Yang is the guy who's been pushing for this, and we all know that he's the one who's really genuinely, legitimately for it. And it's not some political calculus that you don't know for sure if another candidate, if they're just saying it because they want the support, instead of someone who's like, oh, I think this is a really important idea.
Yeah, it's amazing, Scott. Even just in the short period of time from when you were last on the channel to now, how much the tide seems to have started to shift from, well, there's this one guy, Yang, who's for it and everybody else thinks it's crazy or won't even talk about it, to now, you start seeing people loosening up and being either at least open to it or even supportive of it. Mm-hmm. That's incredible. Just a few months have gone by. Like, who knows what'll happen a few months from now, right?
Yeah, and that I believe it was the Hill Harris X poll supports that as well. That's the only one I've seen so far. That was the same polling that did a survey, earlier in the year and then did it later. So I believe that they did that in February or March, and then they surveyed again in September. And support for basic income went from, I believe it was 43% to 49% in just that, 6 months or so. So, where are we going to be when they do it again, let's say in February again? What is support going to be then? And yeah, there's definitely growth in support for this, and obviously it's directly because of Yang. So it's also when I see people who are, say, pro UBI, and they'll be like anti Yang, and or even or just someone who's anti Yang, and they're like, well, he's actually hurting the idea of basic income. He's talking about this all wrong, and da 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 da. And it's like, no, I'm sorry, the data just completely conflicts what you're saying, because growth in support is happening for this idea, and it's because of Yang. So you can't go that way and say that he's somehow hurting the idea. He's championing it in a very strong way, and he's talking about it in the right way.
It reminds me a little bit of maybe 5-10 years ago. People talked about electric cars as like, well, that'll never happen. There's no range, and the incumbents will never produce electric cars. We tried it already, blah blah blah. And now, depending on what state you're in, you see a lot of these electric cars on the road, and they're becoming more and more normal. And who knows, maybe 10 years from now, we'll talk about UBI the same way. It's like, well, of course, we're going to have UBI. It's just a question of what levels.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, too, of like Henry Ford and the Model T, saying that, if he had built something that people wanted, then it would have been like a faster horse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so it takes someone to actually do something really different. And if you create something, and this can be like an actual object, like a car, or it can be like an idea, where if you build up the demand for an idea, that can be much stronger than just looking at where the demand exists right now. Like, you have to be forward thinking enough to not only to decide that something is important, but it's also possible, and that we should do it, and here are the steps to take to do it. And so it's just funny. It reminds me of a blog post I did like years ago, where I collected a bunch of quotes from people in history who were wrong about something that it seems very laughable now, to like say, oh, rockets won't work in space, that we can't break the speed of sound, and there's like really smart people too. So that's where it's interesting, is like you can recognize these names and be like, ooh, wow, they were really wrong about that.
Way off. Yeah. I mean, IBM said the PC or home computing market was really small. Microsoft said like mobile phones, not that big of a deal.
Yeah. Just
Yahoo said that they could handle search. Yeah, it goes on and on, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So, Scott, one of the things that I've noticed is, interestingly enough, I think some of the most energetic criticism of UBI is not necessarily coming from hardcore conservatives who might not even be thinking about it. And it's often within the progressives, within the Democratic Party, a lot of strong concerns or people discrediting UBI as a potential program. Obviously the AOC kind of take on it was not super pro UBI, let's say. And I was kind of curious, like, from your perspective, how do you think we can win over more Democrats in favor of UBI when they say, oh, this is just going to gut the safety net, this is a Trojan horse, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think the key goes into a better understanding of the way the actual system works. And so I think there's a tribalism and kind of a rah-rah team blue kind of thing about the safety net, because Democrats are the ones traditionally who've been building this, and it's traditionally the Republicans who've been trying to tear it down. So if we've been building something, then you're gonna feel more of a sense of pride in it. You're gonna be like, yeah, no, we can't get rid of this. This is important, and it's true that it's better than nothing. And that's really traditionally been the choice, is that you either have this like system that's this safety net that's full of holes and it catches people and traps people, or there's like abject poverty and destitution. And obviously the choice between those two is, well, we got to have a safety net. And so that's what we've had. But the the thing is, and this would even surprise me when I first got into basic income, is I was shocked to learn all these details about how the system actually works. And I put that in quotes even, how, because it really doesn't. When I learned those details, I was outraged at this, because I think that a lot of people were in the same boat that I was, as far as assuming that the system works in a certain way based on kind of common sense of thinking that it should work that way. That oh, sure, we have, let's say, food stamps. So if you ask like a 1,000 random people on the streets about food stamps, most people will know that they exist. And I think most people would think that yeah, if you aren't earning enough money, then you start getting food stamps. And so it's almost like this 100% kind of thing, where if you're poor, then you're getting this assistance, and it's there. And that's it. Like, that's like kind of the level of understanding, is that, yeah, food stamps exist and you get it if your income falls below a certain point. But that's not, of course, the way that it works at all. If you look at the details, there's variability between states. It's a temporary program. It's the amounts can be just absolutely crazy minuscule that people actually get. And it's something that really on average lasts for 3 weeks out of the month, so it's not even enough for people to pay for a full month worth of food. And it lasts for, if you're just like meeting the bare requirements, then it lasts for 3 months maximum. And then there's ways to extend it, if you have kids and stuff. And then if you qualify for it and you get it, then you can't qualify for it again for 3 years. So if you're on it and then you're off of it, then you need it again. It's not there for you. And also, if you're looking at like the number of people it reaches, it's our best program as far as how many people it reaches, and it reaches 3/4 of the people who qualify for it, who we feel should be getting it. So it's a program where 1 out of 4 people who need it don't get it, and therefore they're falling through this net. And that's our best program. So you look into these, and it can even have work requirements and all these other stipulations where, let's say, you need to spend 30 hours a week in office somewhere that you have to get to. So for someone in this position, they can effectively be working for like cents on the dollar, because they're putting basically 8 hours of work in doing something just for food stamps, just basically running on a treadmill essentially to earn these food stamps. And then they're even paying money to take the bus or wherever to go somewhere in order to meet these requirements and stipulations that are applied. And so it's just, if people understand just how poorly the system is and how poorly it treats people, how undignified it is, there's no dignity in the system whatsoever. It's built to punish people. And I think that's what we need to understand from the perspective of the actual people on these programs. What do they think? How do they feel that these programs are treating them and how it works for them? And I think that the Democrats need to really kind of step away from this paternalism that has really, I think, you can say it's part of the mindset of someone on the left in general, kind of thinking that they don't know what's best for them. They either, they don't know how to make proper decisions, or they are unintelligent enough, or let's say they're just, it's just too difficult and I want to help them make the decisions for them. Like, there's kind of this sense of paternalism where they need me. They need me to help them. And so if someone is trying to do something that empowers them and trusts them, then I think it's almost like kind of an identity kind of issue there. Where like if you kind of perceive that you have value as like you're a good person, you're a good person because you're helping other people, you care about other people. And if you support these programs that do that, then you can feel good. Whereas if you can, it's kind of a more conservative kind of libertarian kind of thinking to be like, well, no, we should trust people themselves and they can take care of themselves. And that's true for a lot of people. It's not true for some people, but I think that overall, it's like the small percentage wins out. And so therefore, all these programs are built around these like very, very few people that need additional assistance, instead of just trusting people in general and empowering everybody, and then making sure that we then find those people who need additional assistance and then provide them additional assistance, on top of that. But yeah, so I think the key is just an understanding of how the system actually works, and kind of freeing ourselves from this paternalism and trusting people. And I recommend that anybody and everybody read Tyranny of Kindness. It gets the notes. It gets like all these problems of these conditions, and just how people fall through them and what the consequences are.
Your point about the two choices world, this kind of binary world, resonates a lot with me, because I think I was actually just watching that AOC video, and it seemed to me like she was kind of in like, well, you're either for helping poor people or you're against helping poor people. And if you're for it, then you got to be for all these programs that we spent, generations building. And if you're against it, then, you must be in favor of just removing those programs. So anything that results in resources potentially going into other ways, like a freedom dividend, it must be bad. It's interesting. Like, I don't know that some people acknowledge that there is a third way, that you could care. You actually might care deeply about impoverished people. And because of that, you're in favor of UBI, because you don't believe that their current programs are working. And the thing that I wonder most about some of the kind of democratic opponents of UBI is, if people choose the freedom dividend over some other programs that are cash-like, are you okay with that or not? To me, I'm like, fine, let them, they're going to make the best decision they can. And I remember one of my first econ classes in college, they talked about the Santa Claus tax. And since it's a holiday season, I'll share, I'm sure you've probably heard about it, Scott. But, it's basically like people spend a lot of money buying gifts for other people, which is very good and nice. But usually you don't get the thing that would give you the most value. You're like, my wife buys me a lot of clothes, and I'm like, oh, a turtleneck. And it's not my thing. And she almost knows it, but she still buys these things for me. And you wonder, like, okay, well, she spent money to buy this thing that now I'm not going to wear or rarely wear. I could have spent that money on like a new camera for my show, or a new mic, or a comfortable, pullover. And in some ways, the government programs, the more complex, the more rules, the more regulations, the less efficient they are as well. And how do we know in DC what's right for the person in West Virginia or Ohio or California that's struggling?
Yeah, and just there's so much variability in as far as what people need. Give Directly has been doing some great work as far as analyzing how people, what happens when you give people cash and what do they spend it on. And like one of the charts I like, it looks like a fingerprint to me, because like it has like a list of a lot of people and like their distribution differences as far as what they spend stuff on. And like, so every single person is different. It's like you can almost tell who someone is, based on their differences and what they spend stuff on. And so we have these programs and we're treating people all like they're all identical. And so if you do that, certainly you're going to get some people right. You're going to get them what they need and they're happy with that. But most people are not going to be happy with that. And it's not going to be what they want. So just like with Christmas, so so many people get the wrong presents. So people get the right presents, and that's great. But so many people are just like, yeah, I think I'm just going to return this. I'm going to sell it for cash and then buy actually what I want. But thank you is the thought that counts.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like, I guess, where our welfare system is. It's like, it's the thought that counts. But it doesn't feed people. It doesn't keep people off the streets with a thought. You actually have to have a program that actually works. As an example too, just like at my grocery store, just like a couple blocks from here, the one I go to, they put a sign up on the entrance. I think they put it up a couple of weeks ago now. I'm not exactly sure when they put it up. I think it's been up for a couple of weeks. And so it says that they are temporarily like unable to accept WIC there. So sorry for the inconvenience that we don't accept WIC. And so I thought that was just going to be a very temporary thing, as in like a day or two kind of thing. Like, oh, sorry, malfunction, we'll get this fixed. And it's still that way. So like we just went through Thanksgiving now, and they still don't accept WIC at that grocery store. It's a major grocery store.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the kind of thing that can happen too. Like, we assume these things work, but then there's these little stipulations when it comes to like actual realities on the ground of like, okay, yeah, you've got this, but then, so let's say you have SNAP and WIC, like where can you actually purchase these things that you need? And how far do you have to go in order to get that? Like what are the hours of those things? And it's crazy to me that it works like that. And another example too is when I moved to New Orleans, there was like not too long after, it was like our first hurricane kind of thing, that at least that I experienced. And the signs went up everywhere as far as people temporarily accepting food stamps for hot foods. So people, if a place had food stamps, you are limited usually. That's like something you can't do as far as getting hot foods that are already prepared. You can only use SNAP to actually get like ingredients and stuff like that. And so that's another detail that I didn't know, and I think a lot of people don't know, because you just think that, oh, food stamps are for food. Well, no, it's for certain types of food and certain preparations of food. It's the food that we feel that you should or shouldn't get. Mm-hmm. We're gonna, we feel that if you spend your money on hot food, it's not going to go as far, because it's more expensive. And so that's wasteful. So we're just not going to allow it. And we think you should get beans and rice. That's what you should spend your money on, because that's going to go the furthest. And so we're going to push you in that direction. And yeah, that's just how these systems are.
I mean, you just know, like even in other aspects of life and corporations, let's say, anytime you come up with a program and you have all these rules, you end up having all these weird perverse incentives and these little edge cases, and what started out as a great idea becomes kind of weighed down by the weight of its own complexity. And I'm guessing that supermarket that didn't accept the WIC probably will take cash. And the people who receive WIC, who knows? Like maybe they didn't want more beans and rice. Maybe they want to spend it on salad or like you said, like a rotisserie chicken that's cooked ready and that's going to be more meaningful to the family today, or maybe they want to spend it on tutoring. Who knows?
Yeah, and the level of detail that it gets down to too is like I included just a little bit of this in my article about Yang's freedom dividend, where there's like a chart of what you can spend on. What you can spend WIC on and what you can't, and like it goes down the granularity of saying that I think it was you can buy white eggs, but you can't buy brown eggs. And another one was that the eggs have to be smaller than large. You can't get extra large or jumbo eggs. And this was and it varies by state too. So that was in a specific state, but like that's the kind of detail that we get down to as far as like what people can do or not do. With AOC's thing, what she was talking about recently and calling Yang's freedom dividend a regressive UBI, like, I mean, first of all, that's a grand misdefinition of what regressive is, because I mean, we're talking about a massive decrease in poverty, like practically the abolition of it. It would, we would eliminate as much poverty for everybody as Social Security has for seniors. And that's just, it's huge that we could do that. And so calling it regressive because you're having a transfer of income from the rich that goes to the poor and the middle class, and disproportionately most to the poor, as in you would more than double the disposable income of the bottom 20%. Like there's no way of calling that regressive. Like, it doesn't make any sense to use that word. But she's using that word, and the way she's using it doesn't even make any sense either applied to her own stuff. So, if you look at Medicare for all, so we're going to introduce Medicare for all. And as a result, we're not going to have Medicaid anymore. So we're going to be replacing Medicaid. So everyone will get Medicare. And then if you have Medicaid, you no longer have Medicaid and you have Medicare instead. And the thing about Medicaid, and this is they're trying to make it even worse right now, as far as adding these work requirements to Medicaid that didn't previously exist in various states. And so you can have these work requirements for Medicaid. So in order to receive health care, you have to be, say, job seeking or have a job that does more than 30 hours a week or whatever, or you lose your Medicaid. So if we treated Medicare for all the same way as universal basic income, according to AOC and other progressive who were saying that, Yang's freedom dividend is a Trojan horse, then you would have to keep Medicaid on top of Medicare. And then if you did that and people had to continue qualifying for Medicaid, then you'd have to continue doing the conditions to qualify. So then you would effectively be adding work requirements to Medicare for all, because everyone would get Medicare for all, but those people would still have Medicaid. So you would be effectively adding work requirements to Medicare. And you don't want to do that. Like, you have to remove the requirements that are hurting people and are just ridiculous to even be applying in the first place in order to have your optimal policy. So same with universal basic income. You want to make sure that you don't keep these conditions on top of people, that you get the unconditional basic income, and that's it. Like, that's what they have. And the stuff that adds on top of it is either a universal program, so like Medicare for all, or say some kind of free college or universal education of some kind, or childcare, whatever else that we want to do that's universalized. That can exist on top of the basic income, but not these, and Social Security, these kinds of things, but not these means tested things that apply all these conditions, because then you're effectively applying conditions to the unconditional basic income, which makes it no longer conditional. That's really the key understanding I think people need to get, is we actually have to remove these conditions. That's important. It's not that improves the policy. It doesn't make it worse. It improves it, because we're freeing people up instead of having these 30 hours a week requirements. They're no, it's for 0 hours per week. You can do anything you want to at that time now. You are free. We don't want to keep people trapped like we're doing right now.
I mean, even when you talk about some of those WIC stipulations, if you're on the receiving end of that, that can't be a very empowering vibe that you get, which is no, you're not allowed to do that. We don't trust you. Don't get those extra large eggs. So yeah, I think when I was watching the AOC answer, I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt that I don't think she has spent as much time thinking about UBI as she has stuff like Green New Deal and other topics. And it looked like from that video that she was asked a question from the audience. Really, it wasn't something she had spent a lot of time preparing for. So hopefully she'll come around, and maybe there's some middle ground we can find.
Yeah, and I have hope too, because one thing that she mentioned in that answer as well was that she sees UBI as being potentially a floor that would work in combination with a job guarantee. And so she doesn't she sees those both as working together. Whereas Bernie sees it as an alternative. He sees that job guarantee, he thinks it's better than basic income, and that it's an either or, and she thinks it's an and potentially. And so there you can see that she's willing to disagree with what Bernie thinks. And if she's willing to disagree about that, then she's willing to disagree about other things as well, I think. So I agree that I'm willing to give her the benefit of the doubt, and I think that she just hasn't looked into these details of all this enough. That's why I tried to get her attention to read my article that I wrote about the freedom dividend, in hopes that she would learn more of these details to gain a stronger understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I saw a documentary about her when she ran for Congress, and I've been super impressed with the kind of audacity of her campaign and the boldness of her ideas. So it would be amazing to on our side helping for universal basic income, and it's early, like we were just saying a few months ago, nobody was talking about it. So who knows, maybe a few months from now AOC is one of the big proponents. Anything can happen, right?
Yeah, anything can happen. I certainly think that we're going to see more existing politicians and candidates get behind it. I think we're definitely going to see a lot more candidates because, the existing system does not support this, and it's a great way to get attention and to show that you're different than what exists. And as we were talking about earlier, that's what people are hungry for. They want something that's different. The existing system is not working for them, so they're much more willing to listen to new people with new ideas. And that's also exactly how AOC got into office herself, is that people were willing to listen to these new ideas. And in her case, democratic socialism, as far as an idea, it's not to say it's new, but it's new as far as having some kind of political pull, so that, there's definitely like a shift going on in the Democratic Party, where there's this, kind of fight between your centrist kind of Dems and your progressive left. And so she got in because people are saying, look, this person who has been here representing me for a long time, I'm willing to vote against to get someone new in who is not a politician, who is even a bartender, who is like a real person, because I'm so sick and tired of the existing system and the existing politicians. So yeah, so like she's her own great example of what we're, I think, going to see more and more of. Like, I don't think that what's going to happen, and I know that like a lot of the centrist Dems are hoping this is the case, and I think even like MSNBC is part of this too, is thinking that the people wanted something different. They got Trump, and now they're thinking, all I want is politics as usual. Like we tried the extreme. This is what resulted. So we're going to play it safe next time. And we're going to go back and pick like just a normal, long time politician with like old normal ideas, because we just got to get back to normal. I don't think that's going to happen at all. And I think it's a bad bet to think that's going to happen. I think people are still sick and tired of the existing system, the existing politicians, and we're just going to keep going in that direction until things start improving for people in a real way.
I agree with you, Scott, that a lot of the Biden supporters that I've talked to seem to be basically in favor of go back to normal. I don't want any of this craziness. And I would agree with them, they're back to normal over what we have today, but it still doesn't address some of the bigger problems that we're going to face. Even if you imagine Obama had a third term, like, we would still be talking about automation. We would still be talking about blue collar jobs going away and the struggle that people are going to go through. So hopefully we can move the conversation forward. And if the last few months are any indication, it's possible. I know we're running kind of short on time. Scott, are there any other topics that you wanted to hit that we haven't talked about?
Plug a little bit of Yang Week. I think that's an important thing for people to do. And obviously you've mentioned it before, but I'll just say that let's we've got these big primaries coming up in Iowa and New Hampshire, and we've got to get actual people on the ground. So if people can check out Yang Week and sign up for it and try to make it down to Iowa, then that would be huge. Yeah, it's just crazy too to think we're coming down to the line. It's like back in February when this really started lifting off with the Joe Rogan show. We've come this far, and it's basically just got like a couple months left until stuff really goes down.
Yeah, so thank you for the shout out about the Yang Week. And I totally agree that I would imagine the next 3 months will probably be the most crucial for this entire campaign, even if you assumed that we went all the way to the White House.
Just like kind of like on a small scale, what we felt just last week of just trying to meet this goal of hitting $2 million, and people were just like putting their all into making this happen, and we were able to do it. But we've got to basically apply that same thing for the next 2 months, not necessarily fundraising, although that's still going to be a part of it, but like just we've got to do everything we can. And it's great to see people coming up with ideas too, of thinking, okay, so let's try to make sure that we arm the canvassers with as many materials as possible. So people are saying, all right, so I've got 1,000 cards I can send your way. Who there can I send these to? So we need to do more of that. We need to make sure that the materials get there and that the people get there. We support the people who are there, and just giving it your all, doing a little bit of text banking every day, trying to reach out to people in ways you can, going around your own communities. It's just got to get creative, got to put the work in, and that's how we'll make it happen.
Amen, brother. And we're now shooting morning. I think that it is time well spent, and everybody can pitch in different ways, and whether it's donating, or it's can banking, producing content, or just talking to as many people, offline in real life as you can about the campaign make this. And I think what we also want to do is make sure that no matter what happens, when we look back, we know we left it all on the field. Let's do everything we can, get over the line. We can have a great next 12 weeks and end February strong. Like freaking A, man, we will have made history.
Yeah. So basically what everyone feels like the last week was like, you got to do this for another 12 weeks.
Exactly. Welcome to the NFL. All right. Well, Scott, on that note, I think we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to thank you again for coming and spending time with me. And it was great to have Steve on as well. So thank you, Steve. I know you're out there shoveling snow and doing good work in New Hampshire. And hopefully we'll see you back soon.
I just want to give one final plug too for Humanity Forward Fund, because they're doing like a matching fund. So if you donate to them, then it'll be matched. So that'll help out Yang Week and other initiatives as well. And with that said, goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. Keep it real, buddy. See ya.
Hello, and then Steve finishes off with nerds. Do like a combo thing.
Oh, that's never been done before. You guys want to try that? All right, so I'll do a full hello, nerds, and then Scott, you do a hello, and then Steve, you do nerds. Ready?
Okay.
Okay.